The wind moved differently across the vineyard that morning, carrying a strange chill even as the sun broke through the mist. Julia and Chloe had arrived just the day before, bright-eyed and uneasy, inheriting more than just rows of grapes. Their father's disappearance had been sudden, leaving behind a property steeped in both promise and unease. It was beautiful, sprawling, remote, but every corner seemed to whisper secrets that refused to stay buried. They had thought the vineyard would be their new beginning, a way to honor the family legacy and rebuild their lives. Yet the first steps onto the cracked stone path hinted at something darker. A gate swung open on its own, creaking as though the air itself were warning them. Leaves rustled unnaturally, and shadows shifted where none should have been. Chloe shivered, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, while Julia tightened her grip on the car keys, feeling a nervous pulse through her fingertips. Inside the main house, the air was heavy with dust and old wood, the scent of wine barrels long abandoned. Portraits of ancestors stared down with unblinking eyes, the weight of generations pressing silently on the sisters. An old desk held envelopes and papers, some unopened letters, others faded photographs that seemed to move under the corners of their vision. They found themselves drawn to one folder, bound with a cracked leather strap, marked in their father's careful hand. Family records. Opening it revealed fragments of notes, some in his handwriting, others typewritten decades earlier. References to tragedies, unexplained accidents, and whispers of a family curse. At first, it seemed like superstition, a collection of fearful stories handed down through generations. But the more they read, the more the words tugged at something deep inside them. Events carefully documented, vineyards failing under mysterious circumstances, servants and workers vanishing, storms striking only the properties the family owned. The curse, if it existed, was no tale told to frighten children. It had a pattern, and the vineyard itself seemed to pulse with it. Their first night was sleepless. Julia awoke to the faint sound of footsteps in the hall. Chloe whispered that she had seen shadows sliding across the walls, shapes that were too human to be merely tricks of light. Objects were not where they had been placed. The grandfather clock in the entryway ticked unevenly, chiming at times that did not match the hour. It was subtle at first, almost ignorable. Yet in the silence of that house, every creak became amplified. Every whisper imagined or perhaps real. By morning, a pale fog clung to the vineyard, stretching the rows of vines into ghostly lines. Julia and Chloe ventured outside, drawn to a section of the land that their father had always loved but had been mysteriously neglected in his absence. There, half buried in soil churned by years of neglect, they found a small diary. Its leather cover was cracked, pages yellowed, but the writing was unmistakably their father's. The diary was more than notes, it was a confession. He had been searching, recording patterns, piecing together a truth that even he feared to speak aloud. The vineyard soil, the layout of the rows, the placement of certain trees all contained clues, he wrote, signs of a history that was deliberately hidden. And then, as the entries progressed, his handwriting grew jagged, anxious. He had been close to discovering something dangerous, something that threatened not just him, but anyone who dared to uncover the vineyard's secrets. Chloe flipped a page too quickly and froze. The words beneath her fingers were underlined multiple times, written in a hurried, almost panicked scrawl. They are watching. I can't stay. If I disappear, they will come for anyone who looks too deeply. Julia felt a coldness creep up her spine. The vines behind them swayed as if stirred by something unseen. A bird screamed, startling them both, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. They were alone, yet the air pressed around them like eyes, watching, waiting. By the end of that first day, both sisters understood something terrifying. The vineyard was not merely land or inheritance. It was a warning. Every shadow, every creak, every wind-stirred leaf was a reminder that the past they had inherited was alive, and it was far from benign. And as night fell once more, a single thought lodged itself in both their minds. If the vineyard could hide the truth about their father, what else could it conceal? Would Julia and Chloe uncover the secret before the vineyard's curse claimed them too, or would the soil itself bury the answers forever? The morning after their first night in the vineyard brought no comfort. Mist clung stubbornly to the rows of vines, turning the familiar landscape into a labyrinth of shadows. Julia and Chloe moved cautiously, the diary clutched tightly in Julia's hands. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted their intrusion into the secrets buried beneath it. Their first task was practical. The vineyard had been neglected for years. Overgrown weeds choked the vines, trellises leaned dangerously, and the irrigation system was rusted and broken. At first, they approached it with determination, trying to reclaim the land as if sheer effort could erase the unease that settled over them. But even routine tasks felt unnatural. Tools shifted slightly when left unattended. Shadows lingered in corners where none should exist, and the wind carried murmurs that sounded almost like voices. By afternoon, strange occurrences had escalated. Julia swore she saw a figure slipping between the vines, only for it to vanish when Chloe blinked. Doors creaked open on their own, papers fluttered across tables, and the family dog, usually calm, growled into empty hallways. Even the wind seemed to whisper warnings. The sisters exchanged nervous glances, realizing the vineyard was not just old or neglected, it was aware. Something within it, or watching over it, did not welcome intruders. The diary provided some guidance, though not reassurance. Their father's notes detailed patterns, symbols, and obscure references tied to the land. Certain corners of the vineyard were repeatedly mentioned, often alongside warnings about disturbed soil or places that should not be touched. His entries hinted at rituals performed by ancestors, protective measures meant to contain forces. The family barely understood. Driven by a mix of fear and necessity, Julia and Chloe decided to explore these areas. Their first stop was a cluster of gnarled vines near the far edge of the vineyard, a section their father had described as historically significant. As they dug into the soil to investigate, they uncovered fragments of old tools, broken pottery, and scattered bones remnants of past generations, who may have attempted to manage the vineyard's darker inheritance. The discovery chilled them to the bone. The vineyard's curse was no myth. It had left tangible traces over decades. And now, those traces were warning them, guiding them toward truths that had remained hidden for far too long. Nights became progressively worse. The sisters could know. Longer sleep through the whispers of the wind. Figures moved just beyond the reach of lantern light. Shadows danced along walls with no clear source. Even the animals on the property began to behave erratically, as though sensing the unrest. Each night ended with the same unspoken question lingering between them. What had their father discovered before he vanished? By the end of the second week, Julia and Chloe had located a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of the main house, concealed for decades. Inside lay more documents, artifacts, and research notes that detailed not only family history but their father's meticulous investigation into the vineyard's curse. He had been tracking patterns, connecting historical tragedies, and identifying the source of disturbances that plagued their lineage. The more they read, the clearer it became. His disappearance was no accident. He had been on the brink of discovering something powerful and dangerous, something that wanted to remain hidden. It was during one late evening, while reviewing the documents by candlelight, that they noticed the first direct sign of threat. Footsteps approached the house, deliberate and soft. Julia froze, straining to hear over the thrum of her own heartbeat. Chloe whispered that the footsteps didn't belong to the dog. They faded again before reaching the doorway. The sisters locked the doors and windows, but the feeling persisted. They were being watched, perhaps even studied. Determined to face the reality of their situation, Julia suggested they map the vineyard's anomalies, tracking areas tied to strange events, hidden diaries, and father's notes. They began connecting the dots, locations where accidents had historically occurred, areas their father had marked as sensitive, and corners of the land that seemed to resist cultivation. Patterns emerged, hinting at a concentrated source of energy or malevolence embedded in the vineyard's soil. With each discovery, the stakes grew higher. They realized that the curse was not merely symbolic. It was active. Whether through human intervention, ancestral rituals, or forces beyond comprehension, the vineyard exerted a tangible influence over the property and those who inhabited it. Their father had likely confronted this force directly, and the consequences had been his disappearance. The sisters were not naive. They understood that continuing meant placing themselves in danger. Yet they could not turn back. Every clue, every whisper of the wind, drew them closer to the truth and deeper into the Tiefin legacy that had claimed their father. As the second week came to an end, they stood together on the highest ridge of the vineyard, overlooking rows of twisted vines silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The diary lay open between them, its pages illuminated by lantern light. A chill ran through the air, carrying with it a sound unmistakable yet impossible to locate. A voice, soft, almost pleading. It said only one word. Leave. Julia and Chloe exchanged a look, the weight of the vineyard pressing down upon them. They had uncovered much, yet understood only a fraction of the danger they faced. The vineyard's secrets were calling, demanding their attention. And in the distance, the shadows of the past seemed to move closer. Would they uncover the truth behind their father's disappearance, or would the vineyard's legacy consume them before they had the chance? The vineyard seemed to breathe as Julia and Chloe delved deeper into the secrets their father had left behind. Every day brought new revelations, each more unsettling than the last. Hidden within the pages of the diaries were records of ancestors who had faced misfortune in strikingly similar ways. Sudden deaths, disappearances, inexplicable accidents. The vineyard soil, once thought fertile and benign, had been the stage for tragedies repeated over generations, and it now felt alive with their echoes. They began retracing their father's steps, examining areas he had marked as sensitive. A small grove of twisted oaks, barely surviving the neglect of decades, concealed a stone marker, weathered and half-buried, with initials carved deeply into its surface. Their father had circled it repeatedly in his notes, emphasizing its significance. Around it, the ground was oddly compacted, as if someone or something had been kneeling there repeatedly. Julia's stomach turned. The diary hinted that rituals had been performed here, protective measures that had been abandoned over time, leaving the land vulnerable to forces they could barely comprehend. As the days passed, the vineyard revealed more of its dark history. Old letters from workers, long forgotten, spoke of shadows that moved independently of the wind, of whispers among the vines that foretold misfortune. Chloe found a fragment of a journal from a former caretaker, describing sightings of a figure wandering the fields at night, silently observing the house. The handwriting was spidery and erratic. Much like their father's in the final weeks before his disappearance. It became clear that the curse was not metaphorical. It was as though the vineyard itself resisted intrusion, punishing those who dared to uncover what had been hidden. Julia and Chloe's nights were filled with restless sleep and dreams that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Shadows lingered longer than they should, Rustling in the leaves sounded like footsteps following their movements. Once, they woke to the unmistakable sound of glass breaking in the house. Though no window had been shattered, the sisters' investigation led them to the cellar, a place their father had marked as crucial. Below the house in the damp, dark earth, they discovered rows of crates filled with research, maps, documents, and meticulously labeled soil samples. Their father had been studying the land itself, testing for patterns in the soil and vines, seeking a rational explanation for the anomalies. But as they pieced together his work, a chilling realization took hold. He had been pursuing something far beyond ordinary science, something that tied the family's misfortunes directly to the king to the land. The diary revealed his final days in haunting detail. He had grown increasingly paranoid, noting voices that whispered when he was alone, shadows that seemed to anticipate his movements. He wrote of a presence watching, always just beyond the reach of the lantern light, and of an ancient lineage, of rituals designed to contain a malevolent force. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became. He warned that anyone attempting to follow his path could be consumed by the vineyard itself. One evening, as a storm approached, Julia and Chloe ventured back to the grove of oaks. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the twisted shapes of the vines and casting their shadows in grotesque, shifting patterns. They found a circle of stones that had not been mentioned before, arranged deliberately in a formation that mirrored diagrams in their father's notes. At the center lay a small, weathered box. Inside they found an assortment of objects, a pendant, an old key, and a folded letter addressed to them. The letter was brief, written in their father's unmistakable hand, but its words carried the weight of terror and urgency. Trust the land, but fear what it hides. The truth is close yet dangerous. If you are reading this, you are already part of it. Proceed with caution. The storm hit with full force as they emerged from the grove. Rain hammered the vineyard, wind bent the vines, and thunder shook the ground beneath their feet. Yet amidst the chaos, Julia and Chloe felt an odd clarity. They had to understand the curse, the family's history, and what had happened to their father. Only then could they hope to survive the vineyard's growing hostility. As they returned to the house, the shadows seemed to stretch longer, creeping toward the walls as though aware of their intentions. A sudden noise in the distance, a voice calling their father's name, froze them in place. It was faint, carried by the wind, almost imperceptible. And yet, they both knew it was real. The vineyard was awakening fully now, revealing its secrets piece by piece, daring them to follow. And with every revelation, the sisters felt the weight of the legacy pressing closer, a force determined to test whether they could uncover the truth before it consumed them as it had their father. Would Julia and Chloe survive long enough to confront the vineyard's darkest secrets, or were they already entangled in a web that had claimed generations before them? The storm had passed, but the vineyard did not relent. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and the metallic tang of rain on old soil. Julia and Chloe moved cautiously through the rows, each vine casting twisted shadows in the morning light like hands reaching for them. They had pieced together much of the family's history, discovered their father's final warnings, and begun understanding the forces that seemed to bind the land. Yet the full truth, the reason for his disappearance, remained just out of reach. They returned to the cellar, poring over the father's maps and notes once more. One line caught Julia's eye, nearly illegible. The heart of the vineyard is the key. All else stems from it. The sisters realized that the center of the vineyard, the oldest section, where the original vines had been planted, held the secret their father had been chasing. They had avoided it before, intimidated by its twisted, gnarled appearance. The way the soil seemed darker there, almost pulsing. Gathering their courage, they ventured into the heart of the vineyard. The ground was uneven, roots rising like veins. the scent of damp earth overpowering. Among the vines they found remnants of old rituals, small stones arranged in patterns, charred incense sticks, and faint carvings on the tree trunks that matched symbols in their father's notes. The air here felt alive, charged, as though the vineyard itself were watching, aware of their presence. And then, buried beneath the roots of the oldest vine, they found him. Or at least what remained of him. Their father's journal lay open, pages damp but readable. Next to it, a small hollowed figure carved from wood, its features twisted and unsettling. His notes ended abruptly mid-sentence, describing a discovery he had made something connected to the vineyard, the curse and forces that no one outside the family could understand. The last line spoke of a confrontation, of resisting temptation, to intervene with whatever was embedded in the soil, and a final plea to the sisters, "Do not repeat my mistakes." Julia's hand shook as she held the journal. Chloe's eyes were wide, scanning the surroundings, the feeling of being watched, now overwhelming. It was clear their father had confronted something perhaps not human that had been tied to the family for generations. Whatever it was, it had taken him, leaving only warnings, signs, and the cursed land behind. Night fell quickly, and with it, the vineyard's presence intensified. Shadows moved without wind, and whispers threaded through the air like silk across stone. Yet, as frightening as it was, there was a strange clarity. Julia and Chloe understood now. The vineyard's curse was not simply a force of destruction. It was a legacy, a trial, a test of endurance, cunning, and respect. Those who had ignored it had disappeared. Those who sought to conquer it recklessly had vanished. The land demanded understanding, not dominance. The sisters faced a choice. They could leave, abandon the vineyard and its secrets, sever the connection to their family's dark past, but would the curse follow them unresolved? Or could they stay, embrace the inheritance, and attempt to break the cycle themselves, continuing their father's work, and perhaps confronting the forces that had claimed him? In the dead of night, they made preparations. Fires were lit in the ritual spaces, symbols were realigned according to the father's instructions, and the heart of the vineyard was tended carefully, with reverence. It was a dangerous gamble, each action precise, deliberate. The vine seemed to pulse with energy, responding to their attention. The shadows moved closer, observing, judging. Morning came, but the vineyard had not relented. And yet, there was a shift, a subtle, almost imperceptible change. The land seemed less hostile, less oppressive. The sisters felt a fragile hope, born, not of ignorance, but of understanding. They were not fully safe, nor had they unraveled every secret, but they had faced the heart of the vineyard and survived. As they stood among the twisted vines, the sun rising over the estate, Julia whispered, almost to herself, "We can't leave it like this, not anymore." Chloe nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. The vineyard had claimed their father, tested them, and revealed its secrets. But it also offered a choice, an opportunity to end the cycle. Yet even in this moment of resolve, a chilling thought lingered. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, distant sound like a voice calling through the rows of vines. They could not tell if it was a warning or an invitation, but the truth was undeniable. The vineyard was alive, and it had not finished calling. Would they ever truly escape its reach? Or were Julia and Chloe destined to become another chapter in the land's dark legacy, whispered among the vines for generations to come?